He thinks you're a charity case. A pity project. He said your food was basic. The words played on a loop in my head as I stood at the back of the event tent, staring through the clear vinyl walls at the stringlit reception. My hands trembled around a linen napkin I'd been folding. Just minutes ago, I was prepping the final station for the dessert bar. Now, my son's wedding was turning into a disaster. Hi, I'm Marcus Bell, owner of Bell House Catering in Portland, Oregon. I've been in this business for over 2 decades. Built it from scratch after my wife left me when Caleb was just 8 years old. My kitchen is my life. My name is on every plate that leaves it. And when my only son, Caleb, got engaged to Ella, a bright, seemingly sweet girl from a well-to-do family in the Pearl District, I offered to cater the wedding. For free. A father's gift. What I didn't expect was betrayal. Before we dive deeper, do me one quick favor, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. So many people miss the next story just because they didn't tap that button. And trust me, you don't want to miss how this ends. Now, let's rewind to where everything truly began. 23 years ago, I was working double shifts at a chain restaurant downtown, coming home to an empty apartment after Sarah took everything and left. Caleb would spend weekends with me, sitting on a milk crate in my tiny kitchen while I experimented with recipes I'd scribbled on napkins during slow lunch shifts. "Dad, this tastes like the fancy place Mom took me," he'd say, fork full of my attempt at fondue. Those words kept me going. Every rejection letter from investors, every declined catering proposal, every night I fell asleep face down in recipe books, it all led to Bell House Catering. I named it after Caleb, whose middle name is Bell, after my father who taught me that food was love made visible. The business grew slowly. First, small office parties and birthday celebrations. Then corporate events. Eventually, weddings. I built a reputation on attention to detail and refusing to cut corners. Every tomato was vine-ripened. Every sauce was made from scratch. Every presentation was magazine-worthy. But more than that, I built relationships. Mrs. Chen still calls me personally when she needs catering for her book club. The Martinez family has used us for every quinceañera for the past decade. I remember dietary restrictions, favorite flavors, family stories. That's what separates good catering from great catering, making people feel seen. When Caleb announced the engagement last spring, I felt joy I hadn't experienced in years. At 32, he'd finally found someone who seemed to ground him. Ella Whitmore was 28, worked in marketing for a tech startup, and came from old Portland money. Her family owned real estate throughout the city. She was beautiful in that effortless way some women have, blonde hair that always looked salon fresh, clothes that probably cost more than most people's rent. But when I met her, she seemed gracious enough. Reserved, certainly, but polite. She called me Mr. Bell even after I insisted on Marcus. Their engagement party was at the Whitmore family's Laurelhurst mansion. I wasn't invited to help with the catering, which stung a little, but I understood. They used some boutique firm that specialized in elevated Pacific Northwest cuisine. The crostini were beautiful, I'll give them that, though they lacked soul. When wedding planning began in earnest, the venue was selected quickly, Willowbrook Estate, a winery just outside the city limits. It was elegant, classy, with sweeping views of the valley. The guest list would be 170 people, a mix of Ella's society friends, Caleb's college buddies, and family from both sides. When budget talks came up during a dinner at their apartment, I stepped in without hesitation. "Let me cater it. My gift to you both." Caleb's face lit up. He hugged me tight, the way he used to when he was little, and I'd surprise him with his favorite chocolate chip pancakes on Saturday mornings. Ella's reaction was more subdued. She gave a short smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Bell," she said softly. "That's very generous. I should have paid more attention to that tone." Over the next several months, I threw myself into creating the perfect menu. This wasn't just any wedding, this was my son's wedding. Every detail had to be flawless. I scheduled multiple tasting sessions with them, each one more elaborate than the last. I consulted them at every stage, sending detailed proposals with photographs and ingredient lists. I wanted them to feel involved in every decision. But looking back, Ella rarely gave meaningful feedback. When I'd present 3 appetizer options, she'd nod and say, "They all look fine." When I asked about dietary restrictions for guests, she'd shrug and say, "I'm sure whatever you make will work." Caleb would jump in with enthusiasm, "Dad, that salmon sounds incredible," or, "Can you make those little lamb things you did for the Henderson anniversary?" But Ella would just sit there, scrolling through her phone or staring out the window. I told myself she was just busy with work, stressed about the wedding planning. Some brides are hands-off with catering, I reasoned. They trust the professional to handle it. I ignored the warning signs and focused on the food. The menu I developed was ambitious, even by my standards. For cocktail hour, bacon-wrapped scallops with lemon aioli, duck confit crostini with fig jam, and my signature stuffed mushrooms with herbed goat cheese. The dinner would feature a choice of herb-crusted rack of lamb with rosemary juice, pan-seared halibut with champagne beurre blanc, or my famous braised short ribs that had been featured in Portland Monthly. For sides, I planned roasted fingerling potatoes with fresh herbs, grilled asparagus with almondine, and a wild rice pilaf studded with dried cranberries and pecans. The salad course would be local mixed greens with Oregon hazelnuts, pear, and a white wine vinaigrette. But the real showstopper would be dessert. Instead of a traditional wedding cake, I designed a croquembouche tower, a French confection of cream puffs bound with caramel and decorated with spun sugar. It would stand 3 feet tall, surrounded by an array of petit fours, chocolate-dipped strawberries, lemon tarts, and miniature eclairs. I brought in ingredients from around the world. Heirloom tomatoes from a family farm in California. Aged balsamic from Modena that cost more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a week. Fresh herbs from my own garden that I'd been nurturing since the engagement was announced. This was going to be my masterpiece. Not just the best wedding I'd ever catered, but a testament to everything I'd learned in 2 decades of cooking. A love letter to my son, written in the language I knew best. 2 days before the wedding, I was doing a final walkthrough at Willowbrook Estate with my lead chef, Camille Rodriguez. She'd been with me for 8 years, ever since graduating from culinary school, and I trusted her implicitly. We were going over the timeline, when each course would be served, how the staff would move between the kitchen and reception area, where we'd set up our stations. The venue was stunning in the late afternoon light. The ceremony would take place in the vineyard, with guests seated on wooden chairs facing an arch of white roses and greenery. The reception would be in a glass-walled pavilion overlooking the valley, with round tables dressed in ivory linens and centerpieces of white hydrangeas and eucalyptus. I'd left my phone in the bridal suite after coordinating with the florist about placement cards for the seating chart. When I returned to retrieve it, the door was slightly ajar. I was about to knock when I heard voices inside, female voices, laughing and chatting. I froze when I heard Ella's voice. "Marcus is so stuck in the past. His food tastes like it belongs in a church basement potluck." A woman laughed, her maid of honor, I think. "But he's catering the whole wedding, right?" "Unfortunately," Caleb insisted. "I didn't want his little soup kitchen all over my reception, but what could I do? He got so emotional about it being a family tradition or whatever. But I'll survive. I mean, how bad can chicken and biscuits be?" My chest tightened. Chicken and biscuits? Had she paid attention to anything I'd presented? Another voice chimed in, her cousin from Seattle. I recognized it now. "The cake looked cute though in the photos you showed me." Ella scoffed. "Cute? It looks like a Pinterest fail." I asked for minimalism, clean lines, elegant simplicity. He gave me a buttercream mountain with sugar daisies everywhere. It's so pedestrian. I stood there in the hallway, heart hammering against my ribs. 23 years of building my reputation, and this is how she saw my work? Anyway, Ella continued, and her voice took on a colder tone. "After the wedding, we're setting some serious boundaries. Caleb's way too close to his dad. It's honestly exhausting. All that working-class pride, the constant need to prove himself. We're building a new life together, moving in different circles. We can't carry his baggage forever." That one hit deeper than any critique of my food ever could. "What do you mean?" the maid of honor asked. I mean, we're not going to be doing family dinners every Sunday anymore. We're not going to be celebrating every little business milestone. Caleb needs to grow up and realize that his father's world is not our world. Marcus is, he's a nice man, I suppose, but he's just so small time. So provincial. But the catering business seems successful, the cousin offered. Please. It's catering, not haute cuisine. He makes party food for middle-class families who think olive oil from Costco is fancy. I've eaten at Le Bernardin, at the French Laundry. I know what real food tastes like. I backed away from the door slowly, my hands shaking. I made it to the parking lot before the full weight of what I'd heard settled in. That night, I sat in my office at Bell House Catering until nearly 3 a.m., staring at the invoices spread across my desk. The numbers told a story of devotion I'd never fully calculated. $18,400 in direct costs. Premium ingredients, specialty items ordered weeks in advance, extra staff hired for the event. But that was just the beginning. I'd rescheduled 5 other events to focus solely on Caleb's wedding, turning down nearly $30,000 in revenue. I'd spent dozens of hours on menu development, tasting sessions, and coordination calls. My entire team of 12 staff members had been booked for the weekend, many of them working overtime. More than that, I'd poured my heart into every detail. The custom spice blends I developed specifically for the lamb. The delicate sugar work on the croquembouche that had taken me 3 attempts to perfect. The handwritten menu cards in calligraphy I'd taught myself on YouTube. I wasn't doing this for exposure or to build my business. I was doing it out of pure, unconditional love for my son. Because despite everything, the sleepless nights when he was teething, the soccer practices in the rain, the college tuition that nearly bankrupted me, the job interviews I'd helped him prepare for, he was still the little boy who sat on a milk crate and told me my cooking tasted like the fancy places. But Ella didn't want it. Worse than that, she was actively embarrassed by it. By me. I thought about all the conversations we'd had over the months. How I'd asked her opinion on everything, trying to include her in the process. How she'd deflected or given non-answers. I'd interpreted it as trust in my expertise, but now I realized it was disinterest. Maybe even disdain. And the thing about setting boundaries after the wedding, about Caleb being too close to me, that cut deepest of all. I'd raised him mostly alone after Sarah left. We'd built our relationship on mutual respect and genuine affection. Sunday dinners weren't an obligation, they were the highlight of my week. But apparently, I was baggage. I made a decision that night that would change everything. Saturday dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for an outdoor ceremony. I arrived at Willowbrook Estate at 6 a.m. with my full team, just as I would for any major event. We unloaded our equipment, set up the temporary kitchen in the service building, and began our prep work. Everything proceeded normally. The scallops were wrapped and ready for the sauté pan. The lamb racks were seasoned and brought to room temperature. The croquembouche tower was assembled and waiting in a climate-controlled case. My staff was professional as always, of black pants, white chef coats, hair pulled back, ready to deliver the level of service that had built my reputation. Camille kept glancing at me curiously as the morning progressed. I was quieter than usual, more methodical. "You okay, chef?" she asked around 2 p.m. as we were putting finishing touches on the appetizer platters. "Fine," I said. "Just want everything to be perfect." What I didn't tell her was that everything, every entree, every side dish, every carefully crafted dessert, was being boxed and loaded back into our refrigerated vans even as we finished plating it. By 3:30, our vans were full of $18,000 worth of untouched food, and the temporary kitchen was spotless. At 4 o'clock, I found Caleb in the groom's suite, a comfortable room in the estate's main building where he and his groomsmen were getting ready. He was standing in front of a full-length mirror, struggling with his bow tie, the same way he'd struggled with regular ties when he was in high school and I'd tried to teach him before homecoming dances. "Dad," he grinned when he saw me in the doorway. "Perfect timing. Can you help me with this thing?" I stepped forward and adjusted his collar, just like I had dozens of times over the years. My hands were steadier than I'd expected. "There," I said. "You look good, son." Thanks. Everything all set with the catering? I know you must be in final prep mode. Not exactly, I said. I need you to hear something first. I pulled out my phone. I'd managed to record a snippet of Ella's conversation the day before, just enough to capture the key words. Church basement potluck. Pinterest fail. Baggage. I played it for him. Caleb's face went through several changes as he listened. Confusion first, then recognition, then something that looked like betrayal. He didn't speak for a full minute after the recording ended. Is that, he finally asked. Your bride-to-be, I confirmed. Yesterday afternoon. He sat down heavily on the leather couch, his bow tie askew again. You're canceling, he asked quietly. I nodded. She doesn't want my food. She's embarrassed by it. By me. I won't serve where I'm not wanted. I handed him an envelope I'd prepared. Inside was a check for $18,400, every penny I'd spent on his wedding, plus enough to cover emergency catering if he chose to find a replacement. Use it for whatever you want, I said. Fast food, another caterer, nothing at all. But I'm done here. Caleb looked at the check, then at me. I could see him processing everything, not just what he'd heard in the recording, but probably months of small interactions that suddenly made sense in a new context. Dad, he started, then stopped. You don't have to choose sides today, I told him. It's your wedding day. But I can't pretend I didn't hear what I heard. He looked devastated, but he didn't fight me. He didn't argue or try to convince me to stay. Maybe because he knew, deep down, that Ella had revealed something true about how she saw our family. I squeezed his shoulder, the same way I had when he was nervous before big games or school presentations. I love you, son, I said. That will never change. Then I walked out. Our vans were gone by 4:30. I drove to a coffee shop in town and sat by the window, watching the sun set over the valley where my son was getting married without his father's food. I heard later what happened at the reception. Guests arrived at 5:30 expecting cocktail hour with bacon-wrapped scallops and duck confit crostini. Instead, they found empty tables and confused chatter. By 6 o'clock, Ella was pacing behind the event tent in her $3,000 dress, frantically making phone calls. Someone, probably her maid of honor, managed to rush in prepackaged deli trays and boxed sushi from a nearby grocery store. They served champagne in paper cups because we'd taken all the proper glassware with us. The croquembouche tower was replaced with a sheet cake from the grocery store bakery. Instead of herb-crusted lamb and pan-seared halibut, guests ate turkey sandwiches and California rolls. People started leaving by 8 p.m. I heard all this through Camille, whose cousin worked at the florist and got the full story from the delivery crew. In the tight-knit world of Portland catering, word travels fast. The weeks that followed were strange. Caleb called me 3 days after the wedding, but we didn't talk about what had happened. Instead, we had stilted conversations about work and weather, dancing around the elephant in the room. I threw myself back into my business. The Henderson's anniversary party. A corporate retreat for a law firm. A sweet 16 that required a chocolate fountain and 200 personalized cupcakes. Each event reminded me why I loved this work, the joy on people's faces when they tasted something I'd made with care, the way food could bring families together, create memories, mark life's important moments. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Not just with Caleb, but with my understanding of myself and my place in the world. 3 months after the wedding, I got a call from Mrs. Patterson, an old client whose daughter was planning her own wedding. She'd heard what happened at Caleb's reception and wanted to make sure I knew that my food was anything but basic. Marcus, she said, you catered my daughter's graduation party 5 years ago. Do you remember? The seafood risotto? I did remember. Emma Patterson had just finished her master's degree, and her mother wanted something special but not too fancy, elegant comfort food for 30 people in their backyard. Emma still talks about that risotto, Mrs. Patterson continued. She's trying to recreate it for her fiancé, but she says it's not the same. You have a gift, Marcus. Don't let anyone make you forget that. Those words meant more to me than she probably realized. 7 months after the wedding, Caleb called me on a Thursday evening. I was at home, testing a new recipe for maple-glazed pork tenderloin. "Dad," he said, and his voice was different. Older, somehow. "We need to talk." He came over that night, and we sat at my kitchen table, the same one where he'd done homework while I prepped for catering jobs, where we'd eaten countless meals together over the years. "I filed for divorce," he said without preamble. I set down my coffee cup carefully. "What happened?" "I didn't see it until the reception," he admitted. "Not just what she said about you and your food, but how she acted. She was furious about the grocery store food, but not because it was embarrassing. She was angry because it made her look bad to her friends. She didn't care that people were hungry or disappointed. She cared about appearances." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from when he was little and trying to work through a difficult problem. "And then after, when people asked what happened to the catering, she threw you under the bus. Said you'd been unreliable, that you'd let us down at the last minute. She made it sound like it was your fault." That stung, but it didn't surprise me. I started paying attention after that, Caleb continued. To how she talked about people, about my friends, about our life together. She had this way of diminishing things. Making everything seem less than it was. He looked up at me with eyes that were definitely older than they'd been 7 months earlier. "She said you were holding me back. That our family dinners were keeping me from growing up, from reaching my potential. But Dad, those Sunday dinners are the best part of my week. They're not holding me back, they're what keep me grounded." I felt something loosen in my chest that I didn't even realize had been tight. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't defend you that day. I'm sorry I let her make you feel small. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see what she really thought of us." "You were in love," I said. "People do strange things when they're in love." "Were you? In love with Mom?" The question caught me off guard. Caleb rarely asked about Sarah, about what had happened between us. "I thought I was," I said honestly. "But looking back, I think I was in love with the idea of having a family, of being the kind of man who could provide for a wife and child. Your mother, she had dreams that didn't include small-town life or a husband who came home smelling like kitchen grease. But you never talked badly about her. She's your mother. And she wasn't wrong about everything, she just wanted different things than I could give her." Caleb nodded slowly. "Ella wanted different things too. But the difference is, she wanted me to pretend that my old life didn't matter. She wanted me to be ashamed of where I came from." "And you're not? Are you kidding?" He laughed, but it wasn't bitter. "Dad, you built something from nothing. You raised me on your own. You taught me that honest work has dignity, that treating people well matters more than impressing them. I'm proud of where I come from." We talked until nearly 2 a.m. that night, about marriage and disappointment and the difference between loving someone and loving the person you hope they'll become. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Caleb moved back to his old apartment near downtown, the one-bedroom place where he'd lived before meeting Ella. He started coming to Sunday dinners again, but now he sometimes brought friends, colleagues from his marketing job, neighbors, people he met through recreational sports leagues. My kitchen table, which had felt too big for just me and too small for the formal dinners Ella preferred, was suddenly the right size again for the kind of casual, laughter-filled meals I'd always loved most. One Sunday, Caleb brought a woman named Grace, a teacher at a local elementary school who wore jeans and brought homemade bread to contribute to dinner. She asked detailed questions about my cooking techniques and took notes when I explained how to properly season cast iron. "Your dad is amazing," she told Caleb while helping me clear dishes. This meal was incredible. Simple words, but they carried weight I hadn't realized I'd been missing. The business continued to grow. Word of mouth in Portland's tight-knit community worked in my favor. People appreciated quality, and they appreciated integrity. The story of Caleb's wedding became, in some circles, a legend about standing up for your principles. I hired 2 more full-time staff members and started offering cooking classes on weekends. Families would come in to learn how to make homemade pasta or perfect their knife skills. I found that teaching reminded me why I'd fallen in love with cooking in the first place, the transformation of simple ingredients into something nourishing and beautiful. Looking back now, I realize that Ella's words, painful as they were, forced me to examine what I'd built and why it mattered. For years, I'd measured my success by external metrics, revenue, client reviews, magazine features. But the real value of Bell House Catering wasn't in its profit margins or its Instagram-worthy presentations. It was in the moments when food became connection. When a nervous groom's father asked me to recreate his late wife's famous lasagna recipe for the rehearsal dinner. When a family celebrating their grandmother's 90th birthday specifically requested the same menu I'd served at her 80th. When clients became friends and friends became family. Ella saw my work as basic because she measured it against Michelin stars and celebrity chef restaurants. But I wasn't trying to be Daniel Boulud or Thomas Keller. I was trying to be Marcus Bell, a man who understood that the best meals aren't always the most complicated ones, and that the most important ingredient in any dish is the care with which it's prepared. My food belongs in church basements and community centers and family celebrations because that's where life happens. That's where people gather to mark the moments that matter most: graduations and anniversaries, births and memorials, ordinary Sundays that become extraordinary because someone took the time to cook with love. 3 weeks ago, I catered a small wedding for a couple in their 60s, both widowed, both finding love again later in life. The bride asked for comfort food: meatloaf with mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, homemade rolls. The kind of menu that would make Ella cringe. But when the groom tasted the meatloaf, he started crying. It was exactly like his first wife used to make, he said. She'd been gone for 5 years, and he thought he'd never taste anything like it again. That's when I knew that Ella was wrong about everything that mattered. Betrayal doesn't always come with slamming doors or screaming fights. Sometimes, it's a whisper behind your back, a casual dismissal of everything you've worked to build. Sometimes it's someone you trusted reducing your life's work to a punchline. But here's what I learned: other people's opinions of your worth don't define your worth. Ella's inability to see the value in what I do says more about her than it does about me. Some people will always choose pretension over authenticity, appearance over substance. That's their loss. Caleb is dating Grace seriously now. She wants to learn how to make my famous braised short ribs. We spend Saturday mornings in my kitchen, and she asks questions that show she understands that cooking is about more than following recipes. It's about intuition and tradition and the alchemy that happens when you cook for people you care about. Next month, they're moving in together. Into a house with a big kitchen and a dining room table that can seat 8. Grace has already asked me about catering their housewarming party. Nothing fancy, she said. Just good food for people we love. I can do that. In fact, it's exactly what I do best. If this story struck a nerve, don't just walk away. Like, subscribe, drop a comment. Not just for me, but so you never miss the moment when the quietest man in the room draws the hardest line. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply know your worth and refuse to accept anything less. And remember, the people who truly matter will never ask you to be smaller so they can feel bigger. They'll pull up a chair to your table and ask for seconds.